Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Prof Talk Pod, a show where we talk about things that will help you as a faculty member or an administrator in higher education improve your teaching and help students learn. My name is Dr. Becky Aiken, and I am the director of the Professional Performance Program at the University of Canvas. And with me, as he has been for a few episodes now, is Dr. Galen Clavio.
Becky hasn't fired me yet, so it's happy to be back for another episode. This is great.
I like the excuse for us to connect,
That's right.
honestly. In the busy world that we live
I was
in.
going to say, as difficult as it's been to find the time to record, I'm glad we're able to still do it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this week we want to circle back to something that came up when we were talking about generative AI assignments. I think all the way back in our first episode, which seems like a long time ago already. Time goes fast when you're in the semester. And that was the idea of professors needing to create buy in with students early on in the semester to think about ways that you can motivate and encourage them to engage with your work. And I was actually just seeing some friends from college this last weekend, and one of them is a kindergarten teacher. So she teaches the first year, and I'm over here teaching college students and sometimes graduate students. And so it was interesting to talk to her a little bit about this idea of buy in. And she said that's one of the things that is really, really important to her as a teacher with her kindergartners, which is, crazy to think about. But like the first thing she does in every single activity or project is explain to them what they're doing and why they're doing it. It seems to me like maybe we lose that along the way. I think maybe part of it as faculty is that we are experts in our area and we sometimes forget that not other people are. And so we almost have to like back it up and explain to them. It seems obvious to me why everybody would want to know about marketing. I can't think of any reason why you wouldn't want to know and understand the basics of marketing. But that doesn't mean our students coming into our classroom have any kind of value in that. And it's really our job, I think, to try to create that buy-in with our students and show them why these things matter. I can already hear people's minds going, "We don't have time for that. I don't have enough time. I've got too much content and I can't spend a class period talking just about why they should care about my subject area. I've got to hit the ground running and tell them what they need to know." But I think that one, it should be something maybe you do almost every class period when you introduce a new topic is why does this matter to you, even if you're not going to be a marketer or a journalist or an accountant or a scientist or I don't know, a mathematician. Why is this something that is valuable to you? I don't know if you run into that too, Galen,
Well,
in your conversations.
yeah, no, I do. And look, I think it's there's a lot of challenges around this with faculty for a couple of reasons, I think. And the first one is this. And this is not news to most of the audience here for the show because I think the audience is mostly people who work in higher ed. But it might be news, especially to the non-tenure track folks out there. But there's a lot of people who teach classes regularly, important classes, who never got trained in pedagogy, for whom teaching is not a primary responsibility, and for whom teaching undergraduates is an inconvenience in a lot of cases. And that's not meant to be pejorative. It's just, when you think about what contributes to the tenure track faculty members' career trajectory, it's research, it's working with graduate students who can help you with the research, and it is definitely not like convincing a bunch of sophomores in a 200 or 300 level course that this thing that you don't even necessarily want to teach is something that they need. But I have always felt like we have a responsibility as faculty members and as instructors in general at the college level to understand that students are coming out of educational backgrounds and environments where they are just told to go to class. They're never really necessarily, unless they have a really good teacher at the high school level, they've probably never been told why this is important. It's just assumed that they're just supposed to sit there and learn. And it creates a kind of a disassociation on the part of a lot of students where they're like, I have to take this class because it's part of my requirements. And I'm just going to get through it so I can get to the next requirement. And it's very difficult unless you're in a very hyper-focused type of degree program where students come in and know I have to take classes seriously. I have to do well, either because of grade requirements or because like I have an ultimate goal and I understand what I'm going into. I'm very fortunate. Like, I teach sports media, I teach sports broadcasting, I teach sports and social media. I know, the students that take it seriously from the get go are the ones that are going to do well generally in career pathways. And most everybody in my program, I think, comes in realizing early on if they don't take it seriously, they're going to miss something important that could help them down the line. I think a lot of business schools are built upon that same principle because business schools generally do a really good job of selling their students on the idea that what they're getting in the classroom is a training for what they will be going and doing ultimately and where they'll be getting jobs. I think there's a lot of disciplines, sport management, frankly, being one of them, where there's a lot of disassociation with students because so many sport management programs, frankly, are kind of anti-practical because that's what researchers have decided that they need to be in a lot of cases. It's like, well, we don't teach people how to do things. We teach people how to think, which is not a concept that goes over particularly well a lot of times with undergraduates who would like to know how to do things. And so that's an example you and I think, are both familiar with. But I see that in a lot of other disciplines where you as a faculty member, in my opinion, have to be able to sell the idea of the course to the students. And that is important because ultimately it's not just the learning of the items in there, it's understanding the context of how those items fit into a larger field of meaning that will help that student. And these are oftentimes the most impactful things you do with students is help them to understand that you are helping them along the way, as opposed to it just being a box that they need to check.
Yeah, and I think, I would love to teach my students to be able to think too, and I organize my courses to teach them both things, right? Here's how you think and here's how you do. And it's still important to tell them why they need to know about the how to think piece and not just assume that they are going to want that value because we want it for them. And I'm a marketer. I look at the world through a marketing lens for better or worse. I think it drives most of my family members crazy. But I think about this idea of the marketing exchange, the exchange of value, which is at the core of every product and service. And if you're a good marketer, you're thinking about what is the value that I'm providing to our clients. And like it or not, students are our clients. If you hear nothing, you hear enrollment cliff. What about the enrollment cliff? What are we going to do? Well, higher education, generally speaking, has a value proposition problem,
Mhm.
and faculty are on the ground level with an ability to try to encourage students to see the value proposition to create the best word of mouth possible. And we all know word of mouth marketing is the most effective. So if you can learn what is the value I provide for my students and then communicate that value effectively and deliver it, don't just tell them that they should care and why they should care, but then also give them that value in your class intentionally, instead of, as you mentioned, not all faculty want to teach. And maybe that's a higher education problem that we need to, we could probably rail on and on about the evaluation of faculty in higher education, how that's impacting teaching and learning. But that's one of those things that if we want to exist, we need students. Even at our R1 institution, if faculty want to exist, they need students. And so you have to provide that value. And that's breaking it down and thinking through, what is it that I'm trying to do with this course, this content? Is it an intro to math course? Is it a course that every student has to take? Great. They might not do algebra one day. It's okay to tell them they're not going to do algebra one day, but you still want them to learn it. And this is why. Is it
Yeah.
about the process of solving a problem? Is it about the process of learning how to think through issues when you encounter them? And what will that do for the degrees they want to go into? Those things seem like we know them because we've been there as faculty, but they're not obvious to an
Right.
18-year-old who just came out of high school, like you said, and sat in a class because their parents said if they don't go to school, they will kick them out of the house.
I think back, there's a lot of different threads in this. I think back to like the finite math course I had to take. I'm terrible at math, really, really bad at it. And there was a guy who taught here for many years who was known as the finite guy. Like he would do, they would record his lectures and put them on campus cable and you could follow along. And the thing that made him great was his enthusiasm for the material. And I don't remember him ever saying, here's why you need to learn this, but he did make the subject a lot more easy to learn because there was energy behind the way that he was presenting it. So it wasn't even there a case of him specifically justifying the topic. I think in other cases you do have to specifically justify the topic and have to put it in a larger field of meaning, and keep in mind that, if you're a 30, 40, 50, whatever, 60-year-old person, you've already learned what the field of meaning is, and you already have taken for granted the fact that it's something that needs to be learned. For a lot of students, it's the first time they've thought about these things in any broader context, and it's easy to lose sight of that. And it's especially easy, I think, to just never approach it in the first place. And that kind of ties into the other piece about this that I think is worth bringing up early in the conversation, which is, you and I are about the same age. We went to school about the same time, and it was in an era where the onus was on the student for everything. Like, you had to do all the work. You had to be the one that motivated yourself in most cases to learn what was being put in front of you. You had to essentially kind of knuckle down and do it even if you didn't want to. And the professor was not responsible for you being interested in the material. And that was, I mean, if you think about it, like, how did we ensure that people learned at that point? Well, we were very aggressive and negative with a lot of students. And there was a fear factor, essentially, for lack of a better term, that was intended to adhere the student to the classroom so that they learned what they needed to learn. And that was that. That's just not how things work with students today. And you can point to media and the way that media is consumed, and the fact that you've got 1,000 options now instead of a couple. You can point to the ease of being able to find materials where you don't necessarily have to go to class in order to be able to get the information to pass the tests. I long ago gave up, like, really trying to compel my students to come to class, and I think I'm pretty good at getting people to be interested in what we're doing. There's going to be a certain like certain percentage of students that aren't going to come to class, but for me, I realize, or at least I think, based upon how I approach teaching, I need to be the one who makes the environment worth showing up for students. And that's the buy-in that you're talking about. If I'm presenting as a dull, uninspiring lecturer, if I'm making them do things that are all busy work with no carrot to go alongside the stick, if I'm trying to force students into doing things that they don't see as having a tangible connection to what they think they're getting out of the class, then I can't be surprised if students don't really learn that much in the class, because students of this generation do want to be engaged. They do want to understand, like, this is why we're doing this, not just do it because we tell you, which is the system that you and I grew up in. But students also, don't want their time wasted. They and there's a real perception among students, if you're disorganized, or if your presentation of the material is dull, or if you're not bought into the material and bought into why they need to learn it, they're going to really struggle to care about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that really presents a huge obstacle to buy in, because, think about yourself in that situation. If your boss, if your department chair is saying, we got to do this, but they don't give any justification for doing it other than, we must do this. I mean, most people approach their service obligations as faculty with, like, well, I guess I got to do this, not, I need to do this, and I understand why, because here's how it helps the department or helps the school. Well, flip that relationship around and think about how students feel in your classes. That's a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to the point. Maybe that's a first takeaway is to create buy-in. The first step is to actually have it yourself and be excited about what you're teaching. I recognize that faculty aren't always teaching classes they want to teach. I didn't love teaching budgeting and recreation and sports, not my favorite class. But what are some ways that you can come in with an excitement and come up with examples that illustrate points in ways that seem exciting, and just having that attitude of excitement about being in the room goes a really long way.
Yeah.
Even if you don't want to sit down and map every single assignment to a learning objective, which I do recommend doing, but let's say you don't want to do that, you know, the very basic thing you could do is just come in excited to talk about what you're talking about. I think I got some really terrible teaching evaluations early on, as most new professors do. And when I started to see them change was when I could see it myself getting more comfortable with the material. And the thing that was consistent from students and has been for 10 years is you're so excited about the content that you're teaching. Every single time we come to class, we know that you're going to be excited, even if you're talking about pricing models, which is also not a favorite topic of mine. And I think that's a really good like first takeaway. If you can just remind yourself, that you are a part of the student's experience in the classroom and that your presence and excitement matters, that's going to do a lot to create them that buy-in for them to want to come to you and come to class. And the next maybe step of that is then how do I get them to actually engage in the class activities? I think we've all been in a class, we're like, okay, small group time. I want you to work on this case study or solve this problem, and nobody's talking. By the way, this was a new thing for me 3 years ago. Post COVID, I came back and I'd do in class work, and my students wouldn't be saying a word. And I'd walk around and I'd be like, what are y'all doing? And they were in a Google Doc together, not talking to each other, doing the assignment silently in a Google Doc at the same time. This was a new experience for me. I would say that one, my initial reaction was like, "Don't do that." But, stepping back from it, thinking through how they were used to learning, they just came back from COVID,
Yeah.
right? Like this is learning to them.
Yeah. Well, that's I think it's a key part of being good at getting buy-in or trying to promote an atmosphere where buy-in is going to happen among students is your interpretation of what is an effective method of them learning and working with each other is going to be different from theirs. I think the COVID generation is a great example of this, but I'll even go before that. I mean, you're talking about a generation of students who are used to communicating online, digitally, social media, direct messages, whatever. It is, yes, there are certainly conversations that are had between people, but so much of how students view work is in a hybridized format. The idea that we need to get together and talk in a class, and that's how, like, that's part of the process. It's like that's students are always going to go for the most efficient path of least resistance to get the work done. We've talked about this already with a couple of different things in this podcast. And you can say, well, we don't want you to take the most efficient method that's going to take the least amount of time. And then you're going to have to deal with students saying, well, why not? Can you explain that? Like, how is us sitting in a group dealing with a group of people that we don't really know that well in most cases, and in most cases you'll have a situation where only half the group's really doing work to begin with. Like, how is that any way superior to sitting around on a Google Doc and piecing together the assignment that you yourself have told us we need to do? This is the easiest way to do that. But that's where, again, you need to be able to adequately explain, why are we doing this? Why is this different from group work that you've had in other classes where I mean, group work's always sucked, Becky. We know this. We've been in school. Um, unless there's a tangible output where everybody's really pulling their own weight, which is almost impossible to do even in professional environments. I mean, we don't like getting paired with our peers with group work because rarely is the work ever distributed equally. You always feel like you're either the senior partner in things or you're just like along for the ride. Like, students think the same way. So you have to be intentional in what you're asking them to do and work out ahead of time if there are concerns about the approach, or if you're not getting buy-in because you're seeing them do it in a different way than you thought. Before you're like, well, no, why are you doing it that way? Maybe ask them, are you finding this to be a better way to do things? But then also explain what they're missing by doing it that way. And I think that that's, when you can illustrate to people the reason why we would consider another approach is X, Y, and Z. Here's the reasons why. This is why I want you to try it this way. They may not buy into that immediately, but a lot of this ends up being, can I plant a seed that I can then yield something from later? Because now the students have at least been exposed to a different process than what they were utilizing based upon their prior practices and what they found would work.
And for me, that has been at least a somewhat effective way to think about generative AI in the classroom. And students, you give them that group work, they plug your prompt into ChatGPT, they put that in the group Google Doc, and they're done 3 minutes after you signed what was supposed to be a 20-minute group activity. And what has helped in some of my classes to create buy-in just for students understanding that idea of this is a process and how do we use that generative AI tool in your process, and why do I want you to do this with a little bit more depth or in a different way. We actually like I lead them through, okay, here's a prompt, put it in there. What was your output? What do you think is good about this output? What do you want to know more about? And then I say, okay, ask it a question back, ask it for more context about this part, or depth here, or explanation here, or a citation to support this idea that it gave you. And we talk back and forth as they work with this generative AI program in class. What was good? What wasn't so good? What did you think needed to be added from your own brain, and why? And how can you add to that to get something out of the output that's better? And for me, when it comes to creating buy-in for assignments or a group work, like walking through that process, like you just said, this is the path of least resistance. This is what it gave you. Let's talk about what it gave you and some different models that you can use to improve whatever it is that it gave you, because that's their job. That's going to be their job, right? Like these tools are going to support what they're doing, and those things create buy-in, especially if you tell them, and by the way, this process we just worked through is directly applicable to the work you're going to be doing when you leave college, and how you need to be thinking through tools or this assignment or group work or teamwork when you get out of college.
Yeah, I think all of that is good advice. And look, ultimately, here's the thing: one of the big challenges that a lot of faculty have, and non full time faculty, it's a lot of people who get into this business are not people. They're not necessarily comfortable expounding on things publicly. They're not necessarily comfortable with speaking in an there's so many introverts or self-identified introverts within academia, and this is not a criticism of those people, but it does, I think, sometimes get used as a crutch or an excuse for not leveraging the idea of getting buy-in from students in a class, because the idea is, I'm not here as an actor, I'm not here to sell this, I'm just here to teach what's there, and it's up to the students. And this is where I think, if you feel that way as an instructor, or if you're not comfortable with the process of communicating on a more emotional level with students because of whatever reason, I think there's other ways to go about it that aren't what I would do. For instance, like I'm a bad example, and I tell this to faculty all the time. Like, I'm a professionally trained broadcaster. I worked in that field for years. I'm clearly comfortable talking in front of large groups of people. I am very conscious of the idea that I am very unusual in that. And so what I try to talk with my faculty about is, when this conversation comes up, is like, let's take things that you are comfortable with, and let's take whatever, like, what are your passions within this particular area, and rather than try to get people all gun-ho and excited about the topic, can you explain your own perspectives on why this has mattered in your research, why this has mattered in whatever you've done professionally, and why it's something that students should care about? You do have to open up a little bit, in that you need to be willing and able to share experiences and anecdotes. But I think a lot of people who are introverted by nature in higher ed are naturally hesitant, and feel like somehow they are being judged unnecessarily or unfairly by students, not realizing, in my opinion, most students come into a classroom ready to accept whoever the instructor is as the authority figure. And the biggest mistake you can make is not establishing your contextual authority within the confines of the material that you're putting forward. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to go through what you know about this, how it applies to what you do, and how it applies to the larger industry. And that does not require a lot of emotional, lobbying of students to care about it. Because I see every teaching evaluation of everybody in our school, and every semester after semester, and we got people with a wide variety of abilities to speak extemporaneously, of emotional levels of outwardness. And what I see over and over again, it's not just, and this is it's an interesting perceptual issue with higher ed. The introverts all think the extroverts just get great teaching evaluations, and that you're screwed. And it's like, it's not really the case. But you do have to have confidence in yourself as a faculty member, as an instructor. If you're confident in yourself and you're confident in your knowledge, that comes through. And that really matters to students. And I've got some of the most introverted, quiet faculty members who get great feedback and great evaluations because students are like, wow, this person knows their stuff. This person is so intelligent on this particular area. I am going to learn from them, or I have learned from them key things. And maybe they didn't sell me on why all of that needed to be learned and why I should be enthusiastic about it. But because the instructor or the faculty member was able to describe why this matters, and them as an expert being able to say, here's my experience with it, that really does carry a lot of weight. And so what if you're not going to establish excitement, you can at least establish competency and confidence, and those things carry a lot of water with students.
And I think that that also provides you're mimicking or you're showing them how this looks. Like you are explaining this topic and then you're telling them this is how it applies in my research or life. And then the hope is that students will also be like, well, if they could apply it, how are ways that I could apply this topic? And faculty who aren't comfortable putting on a show, I like to call it. I'm probably more like you. Like I'm fine in front of a group of people, actually happier in front of a group of people than probably not. And so I don't mind the show so much, but that doesn't work for everyone. And so you can just pause and ask students to stop and think about what you just said. It doesn't have to be, a rah moment, right? And say, okay, what are some ways that you think this might look in your life? That it doesn't have to be this groundbreaking idea. And I think sometimes too, as we think about creating buy-in and getting our students to be involved, they are a little bit scared or worried that they're not going to one not going to get it right, and two not going to have anything interesting or new to add to the conversation. And so therefore you as the expert should open up their brains, dump it in, and they should be good to go. But as you give those examples of your own life and show them how all these concepts kind of weave in and out of your research, your teaching, your life outside of school, then they might start to see ways that things can be applied to their own life. And that's a little level of buy-in, because once they see that there's some value outside of sitting in this classroom and getting a grade on this test, then they're more likely to at least, they still might not love your class. They still might say physics was their least favorite class in college.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine, but you want them to see value in it, even if it's not what they want to do with their lives.
The last thing I'll add before we wrap up is a lot of this is going to be dependent on the size of the class and the level of the class. And I think you have to be adaptable as an instructor to understand that you have to approach a 200 to 300 person class a lot differently than an 18 or 20 person class. You have to approach an upperclassman or an upper class student focused course differently than something that's a little more survey related. But in a smaller class, what I try to do to establish buy-in is early on, I try to make a connection with each student in the classroom about what their strengths and weaknesses currently are and how this class will help them through the process of improving the weaknesses and refining the strengths in a bigger scale class. And so that's a lot of small scale meetings, a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of small groups, but also I want them to watch me interacting with other students, because one of the things in those classes I've noticed is that even with a smaller scale upper class student oriented course, you'll oftentimes have very different levels of competency or confidence on the part of the students. And one of the best teaching methods I use is everybody else in the class also has something that they need to work on. It's not just you. And that is a great way not just to build trust between you and the student that you're trying to work with individually, but with you and the class as a whole. There's an esprit de corps that develops when everybody feels like they're going through a similar process. You've also got, with the big scale classes, I think there, I try not to put faculty who aren't comfortable with and aren't energetic in those settings into those settings, because I just think it is so hard in any case, in any setting. I don't care if it's a classroom or if it's a business meeting. If you got 200 people in a room and you can't provide some energy and some enthusiasm and some humor, the things that we respond to well as human beings, at least in Western society, it's going to be real hard for you to captivate the audience and make them believe that this is something they need to go in. And we've all sat in lectures where the people lecturing didn't have that. And as much as you want to be a good student, naturally your brain's going to wander. You're going to read. You're going to do something else. So, that's where I think you need to know your own limitations. And if you're not comfortable in that environment, I think that's where you can go and say, look, I either need help in terms of developing that aspect of what I'm doing, or I need to perhaps not be assigned to that kind of a circumstance. And if you can find someone else who is better at it, until I can get to I would never say like never do it. I do think that's something that can be unlocked in faculty members, where sometimes it's more of a mental block than anything else.
Yeah. So just a final thought so thank you for that because that really ties really well into one of the reasons I wanted to start
Sorry.
writing the newsletter. Oh, you're good. Writing the newsletter and doing the podcast. Something that I think I've learned in the last 12 years teaching is that connection to students is fundamental for success for the teacher and learning for the students. And that's one of the core values of the engaged professor is building that connection. And what you just said is a great example of part of creating buy-in is just getting to know the students and letting them know that you are a human who cares about them as a human and the things that they are interested in and that they want to know about. And like you, I do individual meetings or group meetings in my smaller classes, but in a big class, you can do a poll, right? That just like gets them engaged, ask them what are some things you're excited about, or what are some topics you really want to learn about, or something that is completely outside of this class that you just like or are interested in, because it's really important that we recognize like we are social beings. Even if you're an introvert, we crave connection with other people as humans, and we can build that into our classes in ways that show we care. And I hope most of us do care about our students. I know you and I know me, so I know that we do, but hopefully most of us do. And I think that's a good parting thought to think about is just creating buy-in really starts with creating connection with our students.
Good way to close things out. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for listening to episode 4 and look forward to next time.